Hello and welcome back to another CleaveTech tech tip. Told it wouldn't be as long this time. I'm going to be building these chassis for an upcoming race, so obviously it makes sense to video it and get it all out to you guys and show you what I've been doing with these chassis before we actually go and race them. So I'm building one for me and one for a friend of mine. In fact, I'm actually building one for Gavin Wills. Now, you might know Gavin Wills because you know he's my team partner at the ISRA Worlds, and we have some good success racing together. You might have seen my video here about us finishing very high up in the World Championship and getting second place in Latvia. So I'll put a link in that top corner there. Now, since Latvia, we've been to America, where we got a 7th place. And then after that, we've also been to Italy, where we got a 3rd place. So we've been having some pretty good success together racing as a team. Now, moving on to these chassis, I'm going to be building these for a race in the UK. Right, so I have these two chassis here. Now, they're both hardened ones, and they're both plated ones as well. Now, but they do vary. One of them, I don't know whether you can see with this one, there's quite a lot of movement in this one, and it's not very flat. This one is generally a lot better. So I don't know quite why one is a lot better than the other. Maybe one got bent in a packet, maybe one's got bent in transport at some point in its life from the factory to the distributor, across the great big pond a couple of times, and eventually it got to me. But anyway, one of them is more bent than the other one, so it's going to take a little bit more work. So I'm going to start with the one that's bent the most and get that one right first of all, and then hopefully the other one won't take me quite so long to do. So the first thing I'm going to do is pull it apart. So I need to take out this, what they call a J-bar. I think that was taken off of the JK chassis. It is a slightly different shape to the JK chassis, so as not to copy it. But I assume I take this J-bar out and then I can unhook the front of the chassis and get it apart and concentrate on each piece of the chassis in turn. So these are one of my favourite tools, and they're absolutely brilliant. They're really old-fashioned, and I've had them many, many years. In fact, I think they were my dad's tools originally, and possibly even his dad's before him. So they're actually really good quality, and they are some flat nose pliers, but they go really flat and they're really strong. Some of the ones you get tend not to be very strong on the ends and they bend quite easily, but these are great. And you can just hook them under a little J-bar like this, and you lift it up and unhook the J-bar. And I really like those, rather than trying to manipulate something with needle nose pliers or big standard thick nose pliers. These are much better. So if I find out a nice link of where you can get some modern ones of these, I'll put a link on the screen, or it'll be in the description of the video down below. But there'll try and be a link of where you can find some nice flat nose pliers. So I've pulled it apart, and I'm going to start by having a look at the center section. And there's quite a lot of burrs on this bottom edge of the center section, like this. Now, if this was an ISRA chassis, as an ISRA handout chassis, you're not allowed to grind or polish anything on the chassis. But this is for BSCRA racing, so I'm just going to get rid of a lot of these burrs on the edges of the chassis, which is good because then it's not going to damage the track or scrape on the track at all. So rounding off these edges slightly makes the chassis so much nicer. So I'm going to do that first before I try and flatten anything, because obviously if I try and flatten it, I might be flattening up to a burr, and that's no good. So I need to get rid of those first. So you can see I've started to just take those burrs off the edges. You can see I'm not taking much off the edge. Don't need to take much off just to get rid of those little burrs on the edge. You're not allowed to take much off anyway, but just a little bit, just around that edge. Then if therefore it's not going to do any more damage to the track, and it's going to sit nice and flat on my block when I try and flatten it the best I can. Now, what tool am I using? Well, I'm using one of these Proxon tools. Here we are. You can see there, Micromot 50E, and this one plugs into a little power supply station, and I can vary the speed, etc. And therefore, what tool am I using as well? I'm using like a little rubber impregnated grinding wheel here. Now, links to all these tools I'm going to put in the description down below the video. So if you sort of open up, there's a little arrow somewhere underneath the video. You can open it up and you can see a description of all these tools and links of where you can get all these tools from. But this Proxxon I've had many years. It's very reliable. They still make it. It's been brilliant. And I've got, say, 3 of them. I can have different size collets in each one. And they're very, very useful and quite powerful as well. I mean, you can cut through chassis, etc. with these. They are really powerful. At events, I tend to take a little small battery-powered rotary tool with me. But again, you might have seen that in some of my other videos. But it's nowhere near as powerful as these, and these are still quite small and light. So I've finished going around all the edges, taking all the burrs off. You can see I've hardly taken much off at all on the chassis. Obviously, I don't want to be, accused of grinding it all away and making it so much lighter. So I've hardly taken any off, but I've just taken all the burrs off, so there's no sharp edges now on the bottom. And most of that was actually this plating that's on the chassis. It's hardly any metal from underneath. I haven't gone down actually through the copper plating, which they put on first, before they finish it off with the shiny coating. I haven't even gone through that. So really, it's probably the plating that's made that bottom edge that little bit rough. Well, how much lighter have I made it? Well, let's weigh it and see. Well, there it is. So you can see how much lighter I've made it, and I'll be putting the previous weight of this chassis up on the screen now, so you can compare how much lighter I've made it just by rounding off those bottom edges. So I don't think I've made a massive difference. I think maybe from what I remember from my previous video, and if you haven't seen it, I'll put a link up here in the top corner to my previous video where I weighed these chassis and compared it to different chassis. So looking at this center section, where is it bent the most? Well, I don't know really. There's a slight twist there in the middle. So if I press down on this corner here, it lifts this corner. So you've got these 2 corners are hard on the block. But when you look in the middle, there's quite a bit of flexing in the middle. Now, when you're flattening chassis, it's nice to have a nice flat block. So this is actually a granite surface block. It's actually started off life a bit bigger and it's been cut down. So it's a good enough size. So it's not so heavy that you can't lift it, but it is still pretty heavy. And I also like the fact that it's also very thick. So it lifts the chassis up off the bench, and you can always sort of hang it over the edge and you can get underneath the chassis, and that's going to be useful later when we come to potentially solder chassis together and so on. You might have seen in a previous video me soldering chassis, and I'll put a link in the top right hand corner of my video where I solder together a EDM cut chassis for like the open classes, and I use this block is very useful because I can then hold the soldering iron underneath and solder from underneath. Probably not so important with a production car chassis, but for other types of chassis that works very well. So having a nice, clean, flat block is brilliant to start with. And then also getting your head down really low so that you can see down the sides of the chassis and see where there is potentially a gap underneath the chassis. You can get a smaller version of this block and you could hold it up with some light and you can see through and see whether you can see any gaps underneath the chassis when you finish straightening. So generally I do most of my straightening just with my fingers and by hand. Sometimes you need to hold a particular piece, and then that's where these pliers come in dead handy once again. So looking at this initial problem I've got with this center section, with the middle flexing and it twisting on these corners, I'm probably going to give it a little bit of a twist and a bend in the middle and try and get it to sit flat on the block as best as I can to start with.
One eternity later.
So here we have it. After many hours of working it with my fingers and with these flat nose pliers here, they were really the only tools I needed. I didn't really use any other tools at all, but I've got it pretty flat now, or at least as flat as I'm going to get it. What I found, these are supposedly hardened chassis and they're plated as well. Now, I did find them quite hard to bend, which is, quite good. They were bendable and then they got really hard to bend, and then they always seem to just spring back. So it took a lot of effort to bend this to get it to sit flat, because it seemed to have some good memory and kept springing back to where it was before. So that's maybe a good thing, because it means in an accident, hopefully now it's straight and flat, it won't bend back and get all bent in accidents. But it was a really hard job to actually flatten it the best I can. Now, if you have a look underneath, you can see that where I've been working on it, the plating has sort of worn off a little bit underneath. Because what I tend to do is on my block, when I'm flattening it and straightening it, I tend to sort of rub it a bit like that to get rid of any dust or tiny particles that have gathered underneath, just generally just to clean the block. So you just sort of rub it a little bit like that, and then check out how it sits. You spin it round on the block, and then you check and see how it sits there, and you're always sort of moving it around on the block and checking it. And the plating has started to wear off, so you can actually see where the high spots were in effect and where it was bent the most. You can see sort of around the back edges here. You can see round the side bits here. That's probably due to this pressing here, I would expect. And then around the guide tongue here, because there's quite a complex pressing. There's a lot going on around that very front edge there. And in fact, even in the reflection, you can see that there's some slight, dents and tweaks where it's been, pulled quite strongly into that shape in the press. But it now sits pretty flat, and you can tell that because if I press on this corner now, you can see, you just look at the reflection on the chassis and how it doesn't change. There we go, nothing there. This corner, nothing. This corner, hardly anything. Obviously if I press hard, it runs up on this curve here, but just generally just pressing, nothing. Press in the middle, nothing. A little bit, I don't know if I can get the reflection right. No, it's pretty close there. So that's pretty flat. That was as flat as I could get this center section. Now let's compare that, because I didn't just do one, I did a couple more. So here's another one, and you can see this one again, very similar places here around the guide tab, along these edges here. But there was a little bit here by the motor box, you can see was a bit of a high spot here. But now that one also sits nice and flat. And then I also did another one. Here we go. That one again, this time around the motor box here, along the back edge there, but again the same sort of around the front and a little bit more in the middle. So they're all, the spots on each one are about the same places on each one of those center sections. And then just to give you a little teaser of what's to come, I also straightened one of these. This is one that hasn't been plated, a center section that hasn't been plated, but it was still pretty hard, and you can tell perhaps what's going to fit in that. Now let me know in the comments below if you've flattened one and whether you've found the same particular areas where they need flattening more so than others, or whether you've got a plated one or an unplated one, and some of the experiences you've had when you've been trying to bend them and flatten them. Put a comment below, please. So there we have it, the end of another video. I know I've only managed to straighten the center section, but 14 minutes to straighten a center section is very good. Well, the video was 14 minutes, but it might have taken me just a little bit longer than that. So thanks again for watching. Please keep subscribing. Please keep looking out for my videos, because there's more to come when I build the rest of this chassis. See you for now. Bye.